Tonight's presentation is a very unique one relating to Jerusalem, and it is actually a modern day saga. So, as you know, tomorrow evening, we commemorate the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, the 9th day of Av, when we commemorate the destruction of both the first and second temple in Jerusalem, the first one by the Babylonians and the second by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. But tonight, we are going to talk about a different form of destruction. And this one didn't take place 2,000 years ago, but rather just over 20 years ago on the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism. So we are going to transition now to Israel. And there we are at the Kotel, which is the western wall of the Temple Mount. Before we begin the presentation, if I can take a poll here, who here has been to Jerusalem? Please give me a thumbs up. Nice. Nice to see. I wish there were a few more thumbs up, but it was, I'm sure for those of you who have been to Jerusalem, you have stood in front of the Western Wall, and it's just an awesome feeling to stand in front of a wall that's steeped with Jewish history for thousands of years. Tonight, we're going to focus on the Temple Mount, and we're going to bring to light a destruction, an archaeological destruction that took place there, as I mentioned earlier, beginning in 1996. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation, which will include images, maps, and diagrams, and a few video clips. And you will really be swept into this drama. So let me begin. Okay, so here we are. The title of this presentation is, one second, just give me 1 second before we begin. Okay, let's do that again. Here we go. Title of this presentation is One Group's Trash is Another Group's Treasure Trove, the fascinating saga of the Temple Mount archaeological destruction and the subsequent salvage operation. Another title that we may suggest is the battle over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So let's do the lecture outline tonight. We're going to begin by talking about the Islamic revisionism, which is simply difficult to understand, but for political reasons, there's been some serious revisionism, particularly as it pertains to the Temple Mount. We're going to talk about the Temple Mount archaeological destruction, and then we're going to talk about the Temple Mount salvage operation and the sifting project. And then we're going to showcase some of the findings from the Temple Mount salvage project. So we begin with Islamic revisionism, where there's a movement to deny the historic Jewish connection to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So here is a quote. This concept called temple denial is a concept that has begun in 1987, if you were to peg a date. And that was a time when the Palestinian leadership began to deny the fact that there ever was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. So here's a quote from the former Mufti of Jerusalem, and he says, "There was never a Jewish temple on Al-Aqsa, and there is no proof that there ever was a temple. Because Allah is fair, he would not agree to make Al-Aqsa if there were a temple there for others beforehand." You get the logic? And here's another quote from Yasser Arafat at the Camp David summit that took place in the year 2000 with Ehud Barak, Prime Minister of Israel, Bill Clinton, President of the United States, and Yasser Arafat, who represented the Palestinian Authority. And when it came to a peace proposition that Bill Clinton suggested, where the Israelis keep the Temple Mount underground and the Arabs keep it whatever is above ground, Yasser Arafat said, stated simply, there was no Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. So Bill Clinton says, well, it says in the encyclopedia that there was. So Arafat counters by saying that there was a Jewish temple, but it was not in the Temple Mount. Rather, it was in Nablus. Now, Nablus is a city in the West Bank in Samaria, which is the biblical Shechem. Now, then another form of denial came about, and this one is Western Wall denial. And this is really coming home, because the Western Wall is the site where many, many Jews come to pray. Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people visit the Western Wall. And in an official paper from the Palestinian Authority came out in 2010. And it stated simply that Jews have no right to the Western Wall. And this is what the official paper went on to say. And get this, this wall was never part of the so-called Temple Mount, but Muslim tolerance allowed the Jews to stand in front of it and weep over its destruction. Then it continues, Al-Burak Wall is in fact the Western Wall of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So there you have it. The official paper of the Palestinian Ministry of Information claims that the Western Wall, which is known in Arabic as Al-Burak Wall, was never the wall of a Temple Mount, but rather it's the Western Wall of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, the reason why it's important for us to know this, even though we have so much accumulated evidence that the Temple did in fact exist on the Temple Mount. But as the famous saying goes, if you tell a lie enough times, it'll eventually be accepted as a truth. So it's important that we know the facts on the ground and underground. Now, what's interesting is that the same group, the authority that controls the Temple Mount today, which is known as the Waqf, they have authored a visitor's guide that's still around. And this guide is from 1924. And here's what it says in this guide, quote, it says, this is called a brief guide to the Al-Haram al-Sharif. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. This too is the spot, according to the universal belief on which David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the authority of a Temple Mount themselves, the Waqf, agrees that this Temple Mount is associated with the first temple, not only with the second temple, but with the first temple. But for political reasons, they began to deny that there ever was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. In 2014, the Waqf, who controls the Temple Mount, gave out a little pamphlet called Clarifications for Misconceptions. And here are some of the main points in the beginning of this booklet. It says, Dome of the Rock and not Holy of Holies. Ribat al-Kurd and not the Little Wailing Wall. Marwani Prayer Hall and not Solomon's Stables. We're going to see more about that soon. Al-Burak Wall and not the Wailing Wall. Al-Aqsa Mosque and not the temple. Now they have two objectives. The first one is to change the facts on the ground, complete Islamization of a Temple Mount. And the second objective is to remove any association and evidence of other religions and return it to its, quote, original state. Now, of course, there was this infamous UNESCO resolution on Jerusalem. UNESCO is a United Nations social and cultural organization. The United Nations Educational, Social, Cultural Organization, and they have designated certain areas around the world as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. One of those sites is the Temple Mount because of its history. Now, In 2016, UNESCO came out with a resolution which there was no mention of any Jewish historic connection to Jerusalem. It simply referred to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram, Al-Sharif, and its surrounding, without mentioning any Jewish connection, not the Western Wall, not the fact that there were Jewish temples on this site. Jerusalem was simply stripped of its Jewish history.